to the Crazy Agent Dinner Party.
Nobody helps you. Just
Part group therapy, part inspiration, entirely for real estate agents to dish on this crazy business we're in.
Yeah, actually. my mom would be like, Amanda, I cannot.
Come on in, have a seat at our table. And remember, real estate is crazy, and you don't have to be. Welcome to the Crazy Agent Dinner Party, where we dish on this crazy industry known as real estate. Here are your hostesses with the mostesses, with a combined 40 plus years in real estate, Coach Konversion Kourtney, and the real estate mom you never knew you needed, Amanda, the marketing mama. On today's menu, we're dishing up on home inspection hell.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny. Home inspection hell, right, agents? Man, that just reminds me, we always have so much on our plates, don't we? That's why we come together and gather every single week to have a little bit of group therapy, a little bit of inspiration, but the entire thing that we're doing here is for all of us real estate agents to hopefully learn to sell more real estate and have way more fun while we're doing it. So for starters, let's just dig into like the process of home inspection and how that's basically your second negotiation point, right? Because in every contract you do 3 negotiations. Do you agree with that?
Yeah,
That's just kind of like my theory.
I mean, there's more.
There's
more, right? These are the major ones.
The major 3. Well, the first one is obviously getting it under contract, but then the second big time is your inspection contingency period and what comes from it or whatnot. And so I feel as though that is the biggest one, because what typically happens is that an agent doesn't know how to mitigate the responses from a home inspection. Or this happens a lot too. Has this ever happened to you where they just assume that the seller is lying, or like they knew about this? It wasn't on the seller's disclosure. I knew it. I knew they were full of it. And that's not always the case. Let me tell you, I actually have an example of why that is not always true. So I was the listing agent for a little old lady about my height. I'm 5'1". Are you 6'1"?
6 feet.
You're 6'6".
6.
That's great.
And you really thought I was 6'6" because you're so short. It's like, wow, she's 6'6".
I'm like, that's amazing.
It all makes sense now.
With heels, I might be 6'6".
You might be.
Yeah,
I mean, I
there you
definitely wear a 6-inch heel, so it would be. So I'm, 5'6" on a good day. So in any event, she was little. She was a little bitty midget like me, and so she was also elderly. And the whole reason we were selling her house is because she never went upstairs anymore. She was basically living all downstairs. Well, in the kind of, I don't know, hallway, I guess, like it was almost like a foyer, but upstairs, like a breezeway. There was a teeny tiny little yellow spot, and like you would never have seen it. I didn't because I always walk, through at your listing appointment.
Yeah.
There was nothing noticeable. I did not know. Of course, I'm not a home inspector. Mind you, that's the biggest thing, right? You're not that's not what you do in the process. But you do like to take a look around at the property and kind of see, what are some big ticket items that you might need to handle before you list, or to be aware of as you're listing that they might need to make concessions for. I didn't see it. It was like this big. She never went up there because of her knees. So in any event, she didn't put it on her seller's disclosure that she had an active leak. But during the home inspection, she had an active leak because it was that little yellow spot, had a lot of wetness above it, which is what the inspector found out. And the buyer and the buyer's agent was like, again, death battle royale, thinking that little tiny lady was just trying to screw them over. And I'm like, no, logically, she's tiny. She doesn't go upstairs. She can't see that far. I didn't even notice it on my walkthrough. I mean, you'd have to have.
And sometimes for just a normal homeowner,
right?
They may not have an eye for that.
I mean, maybe
going up and down the stairs,
right?
Maybe they just don't have an eye for it,
right?
What brought it up? They felt like if there's one thing wrong, then there's got to be
because it was an active leak, and so why
did they think that she was
deceiving them?
The
because it had a yellow spot and there was an active leak going on. And I'm like, how could she, I can barely see it. Now that I'm here and I see it, I see what you're saying. But again, even during my walkthrough, I didn't see it. And again, she never went upstairs. I think if you were in your house every day and you were up there and you would probably notice it. If I was really, really, really spending a solid hour up there walking around and doing my once over, I might have noticed it. But
I think you'd notice if you had to put a bucket under it.
Right.
But I wouldn't notice if I didn't have to put a bucket under it.
It wasn't dripping. It was just like, it was barely starting to get like that kind of little yellow tinge or whatever. And so they were just so sure that she had to have known. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. So that's one of those tiny catastrophes where you're like, let's just be human beings here and let's think logically. And so luckily the agent was able to talk their buyer off the ledge, and we came to terms, of course, but what do you do when something like that happens where they truly wouldn't know? You can't know everything. Again, unless you are a home inspector or you're, somebody that is handy like that, even if you live there every day, you might not know if there's something wrong, if you have a broken pipe or whatnot,
And when we talk about seller's property disclosures, it's to the best of the seller's knowledge.
Correct.
And so just to reassure the buyer that it's to the best of the seller's knowledge. Right. And so for that agent to say, like, she knew about it.
But how could she not have known? I'm like, well, I explained to you again, her knees. The reason we're selling is she has bad knees because she doesn't go upstairs. She's very short. Like, all the things. I'm like, it was just so wild that they were almost angry about it, which you should never be angry in a negotiation, in my opinion. There's no reason to be.
As an agent, no, that's like, that's...
it's not emotional. It's professional.
To be able to negotiate, we have to stay calm.
Exactly.
And so tell me about so that's a very tiny, and then the seller's property disclosure came up. Tell me a story about a big inspection item that came up and how you handled that.
Okay, so here's what I don't know if you guys work with the same home inspectors over and over and over again. I really do feel like partnerships in our business are just a very secure way to again, mitigate some of the tiny catastrophes, because if you really think about it, you're almost a whole new cast of characters with every single transaction. And that's why when you have the ability to build trustworthy relationships with, inspectors and title agents and lenders and, everyone that can be involved, roofing companies, home insurance people, everybody, home warranty people, that you kind of make your own little team, right? And so I always like to work with the same couple of home inspectors if my buyer doesn't have, one that they'd like to use. And if they do, then I have the same conversation with them, which is, and this is how I do it. So I never want to obviously hide anything from my buyer. I want them to know everything about the property that I do. But I do have my buyers come to the home inspection about an hour before it is supposed to end. So if the home inspection's at 9, I have them come at 10:30. Depending on the size of the house, of course. Some of them I'm like, okay, it's been 8 hours. What are we doing?
True story.
Yes, we just had one of those. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going to live here today. And we do. But that way, if one of the big ticket items comes up in the time between when we start, because as the agent, you have to let the inspector in the property. They don't usually have a super key or whatnot. And by the time that they start and the time that the buyers are going to arrive, if there are any of those big ticket items, so in the case where I'm talking about that recently happened, the pool, he was thinking maybe needed to be resurfaced, which was not something that we were thinking needed to happen. And we're definitely not prepared to negotiate or even consider it. So I utilized that time, to get onto my laptop and get some quotes, and then also schedule some pool inspectors to come during our contingency period. Sure. So that's one of those. To me, I always want to make sure that the inspector and I are working together to come up with solutions for any potential problems before we involve the buyer and give them the options and the choices. Otherwise, what do they tend to do? They tend to spiral out of control, and that little thread of buyer's remorse starts to unravel. When it's not, honestly, a pool resurfacing is kind of a big deal. It's very expensive, but we were actually able to get the sellers to pay for it. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. I always feel too, with the inspection, is that as we were going through the inspection and we explained to our buyers, let them know if it's not a new home, it's a home that's been lived in. And the inspector's job is to go in there and find everything wrong with the property. So it can be very alarming to a buyer who's purchasing a property and they've got this long list of things that are wrong with the house, right?
Right. I'm like, meanwhile, you're using a shower curtain as a wall in your current residence. But okay, whatever. That's fine,
Oh, and there's no GFCI.
Right? Like, come on. It's cool.
So an example for me is I had an inspection come up and we made it through the inspection. And in Colorado, we do 3 inspections, a sewer scope, the regular inspection, and then a radon inspection.
A radon inspection. That's like a big deal. So we have the radon disclosure here in Florida, but I mean, I've literally never in
do a radon
in
test.
21 years ever had a radon inspection.
Wow.
I've had mold inspections out the yin yang, but not radon. Why is it such a big deal there?
With the type of
soil
that we have. And it could be in one property, and then the next door neighbor could have no signs of it.
Wow.
And so you just never know.
You know, actually in South, so there, we have sinkhole inspections, not necessarily where we live here in Volusia and like Central Florida, but South Florida and like around Tampa area, we have sinkhole inspections there.
Right? I've seen a sinkhole map and I was like, whoa.
I mean, that's my nightmare, honestly. Like,
And I would say, like, that's why it's important to get a professional, because somebody from out of state, we don't really experience sinkholes or termites, right? Like, I had a lender who was a lender out of New York, and they didn't want to close the deal because they needed a termite inspection.
Yeah.
And I'm like, in 24 years, I've never done a termite inspection.
Are you serious?
In Colorado.
Wow. They don't need to do that for VA?
No.
Really?
No termite inspection.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's important to know the type of inspections that need to be done, right? And so for this example, we did the inspection went great, had the sewer line scoped, which they take this fancy little camera down. And let me tell you a story too on this.
Okay.
So the buyers and I were down there with the inspector, and one of the buyers disappears. And we're like, all right, cool. So my inspector starts reeling in, puts the camera in the sewer line, and then you see this fly by, and he's like, oh, it works great. The sewer line's fantastic.
Oh.
And then the buyer comes back down, and we're like, oh, we know what you did.
That's a crappy story.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I'll be here all night.
Miss Barkley, I know. We need one of those things.
So
that's hilarious.
We'll get it working. That's great.
It's like a colonoscopy where you had potato skins the night before. Did you have potato skins last night? How did you know that?
And so with this sewer scope that we did, it wasn't attached to the house. Oh. So from the inside of the house to the exterior of the house, it looked fine, and then it just completely dropped off. And so we're negotiating. Like, this isn't.
Like, where's all the shit
it's
going?
vacant right
Literally.
now. Once she moves in, it'd come back right,
right.
or just drop off.
Oh, that's bizarre.
And so it's important to do these inspections because, for one, that the buyer knows what they're getting.
Yeah, because it's buyer beware, right? Like, you have to know exactly what you're getting. Have you ever waived a home inspection?
When the market was hot, we waived it a lot, right?
Yeah, we used it as, and by waiving, so one of the things that we have done in the past is we waive, but we still have it, but we know that we can't cancel the contract based on it. So you still know, what kind of product that you're purchasing, what kind of house you're getting, but you can't cancel because of it.
There were a lot of agents who were completely waiving it at that time, and buyers were okay with it. They didn't care at that time.
Because that was back
they were getting into.
Like, that meme thing with the apple, and this apple is going for, yes, it was insane. I did not.
Now, though, it's not common at all to waive an inspection.
I truly don't believe that you should. And obviously, if you ever do, have them sign off on the fact that they're waiving it, because then you need to protect yourself and your broker.
Yeah, it's important that the buyers know what they're getting into. And with that, they have all the information. And so that they can make a decision based on the information that they get on what they would like fixed, what's important to them, if anything's important to them. And then it's our job to be able to help negotiate that with the other agent.
So I will say one of the biggest, oh my goodness, moments that I get, and it happens, I swear, every week, I feel like every week this year, is that the inspection comes back and it needs a new roof, which is a pretty big ticket item. And agents lose their mind over this. So how do you handle that in Colorado? I'll tell you how we handle it in Florida, but go ahead and give me kind of a rundown.
Colorado, recently, we've had a lot of hail damage. So a lot of the times the roofs are covered if there's hail damage.
Yes.
By insurance.
Okay.
And so if an inspector comes up and they see hail damage, then we contact the seller. The seller will have their insurance company come out and assess the roof, assess the damage. If it's not because of hail, then for a buyer, that's a huge expense on top of what they're already committed to doing, right?
Exactly.
And so a lot of the times we ask for the seller to do it, and the seller now has to disclose it, right?
Right,
Because
they
they now know that the roof needs to be replaced.
Exactly. Moving forward, if they don't. So no matter what, they have to talk about it.
And what we like to do too is I will get my buyers bids with my contractors on every inspection, and then the seller agent typically gets bids from whoever they use.
Right.
And then it comes like meeting of the minds to figure out what the best opportunity is for both the buyer and the seller.
Exactly. So what about, so if you know that it needs a new roof, do you recommend that your seller replace it beforehand, or?
Yeah, typically we get it replaced ahead of time instead of asking for a concession. And the reason why we get it replaced ahead of time instead of the concession is because sometimes there's limits on, depending on what the contract is, there's allowable limits on what we can use for closing costs.
Correct.
And then if we hold the money back, then that becomes a problem too, because the lender's going to be like, it needs a new roof.
Prior to closing or whatnot.
Right. Yeah, because they're going to see like you're holding money back, you're paying a roofer, and it needs a new roof.
Right.
I want to lend on something that doesn't. I want to lend on a home that doesn't need a new roof.
There's a lot of moving parts that go into that, because sometimes depending on what the, I think it's called a C rating. I don't know, but it's got to be a subject to or whatever. There's so many things in real estate, right? So
what
crazy.
I love about this is like just how real estate is the same nationwide and it's completely different.
I know,
right? It's
well,
very
because
interesting on
what's the biggest variable, but also the other variable is the property itself, and that's the other thing too. Because when you are representing a financing buyer, there's also the underwriting of the property itself, and that's where the home inspection can work to your advantage as a buyer, because if the property's got problems, then we got to fix that property, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, in order to make this deal happen. And so I don't necessarily look at a bad home inspection as a bad thing. I look at it as like, okay, we have a new challenge to work together to solve.
And I do want to comment on that. It's important to work with an agent on the other end who also has that same goal, right?
Yeah, but what about, didn't you just have a deal where the seller was not motivated at all? And you're like, was it the same deal with the poop?
I've had a couple inspections from Hal recently.
Yes.
And I believe it's because the market's so tight right now that people are just like, I mean, their sellers are like, I'm not willing to do anything.
Is your inventory that low out there?
Our inventory is low, and the price points, our average price point is like $675, and so
Nice.
in Denver, a $450,000 home, it's going to have issues. It's going to need updating or whatever, and so. The last inspection that I had was...
We're moving to Denver, Jenny.
I know, right?
We can't afford to move to Denver.
I know.
And here's what I want to say,
Give me a
too.
month. We'll be able to handle it.
Here's what I want to say, too, is... so we had the inspection, and it came up that there's mold in the property, and in the basement, the basement's finished, and we could see where it wasn't finished that there was mold. So we don't know what's behind those walls. And so, like, our plan with the mold in this inspection was to find out what's behind the walls,
Right.
and then we can decide and determine, like, what we're going to ask for. And then in the same property, my inspector found a meth pipe, and I, out of 24 years, had never experienced, even when the market tanked, like I'd have bums living in there, I'd have like needles and stuff, and it was like I never had an experience where it was an issue, like with meth. And so
I still to this day have not had a meth issue.
And at this point, it's just under assumption, like this may or may not be a meth pipe.
Yeah.
And the renter's grandmother was there. And so I asked her, I was like, just digging deep. I'm representing my buyers and I have their best interest in mind.
Right.
And digging deep, and I'm like, do you mind if I ask you a question? She's like, no, go ahead.
Oh man, I would have milked that cow for everything it was worth, for sure. Oh my gosh. Yes, you're here.
And I'm like,
tell me everything.
Does your nephew smoke meth? And she's like, oh, no. Here's what happened.
It was probably hers. Maybe, you never know. You never know.
She went on and explained to me. And so at that point, I know and tell the agent, and now the agent knows. And it's important for me that we did cancel the contract.
Because they weren't willing to mitigate all of the...
They weren't willing to mitigate the mold.
Yeah.
They weren't, they didn't even address the meth.
Right.
And it needed a new roof that had nothing to do with hail.
Right.
And they wanted to give us $1,200. And so it's taking all of these that come up and then presenting all the options to the buyer,
Right.
and having the buyer make the decision on how they want to
Right.
proceed. Sometimes we don't save every deal, right?
I mean,
And that's okay.
that does happen from time to time, because it's almost like, oh man, one more thing, one more. And remember, we talked about buyer's remorse. Sometimes they take that one more thing as like a sign from God that they shouldn't buy it. And I'm like, maybe let's see what we can work out here. The other thing too that tends to happen is we forget that in addition to the repairs that are needed, it is also like then up to the listing agent to negotiate then with the seller. Now I have had to, and no offense, I believe everybody does real estate their own way, and there's not one right way to do it. Do not get me wrong. But you can tell sometimes when an agent has been beat up by their client and they're like, he's never going to say yes. I'm like, well, would you mind if I made a plea for on the behalf of this contract and maybe like put something together? And it was amazing. Like, she's actually been licensed since I was in high school. Like, she's an old, and she was good, but you could tell like he had given her a run for her money. So she welcomed it with open arms. And luckily I was able to, it's kind of like working with a partner.
I've never done that.
You've never done that? Oh man, I was so happy to do it because I could tell that they had this existing relationship, and I think there was probably a barrier there. So to me, if an agent is already like, they're not going to, I kind of like to dig in a little bit, because I'm like, well, we just got the information. Is that what's going on? Like, what makes you think that? And I always dig in a little bit more, because sometimes I'm like, I know we're supposed to speak on behalf of our clients, but why would they not want to? Do they not want to sell? Are they not motivated? Yeah. And that's where you find out, like, your guy, for instance, was like, he owned it outright. He didn't need to sell it. So he wasn't. He was not motivated at all. But he told you why. He told you why.
The seller's not motivated.
Yeah.
And that's important for a good agent to be able to get that information out.
Absolutely.
Right? And because now I know where the seller stands.
Yeah. I think in that case of that agent, she said, well, he's unrealistic. And I'm like, oh, hello, I'm here to help. Like, let me help you. I can get real.
And I love that you say that, because our job is not to give up right away, right? Like, if it needs...
relentless. Anything.
Relentless.
Yeah.
And that's our job, is like anything that comes up that's important to the buyer, give them the information, do our job, present them with all the bids, whatever we have.
Right.
Give them that information so that they can they can make a decision, right? They can make a decision on it. And I am always like, find solutions. So what's next?
Everything is figure outable. That's my theme. I want to tattoo that on my forehead so that people know that's what I'm about. We can figure this out, Everything is figure outable.
I'm picturing you with it like
I don't have any tattoos. I barely put on temporary tattoos. I'm like, no, it's not my thing.
So let's wow, I really liked this, because we dug in deep for you guys and gave you some good examples. What is the icing on the cake?
What is the icing on the cake for home inspections? Get a home inspection. Hello. If you don't, sign off that you don't do it. I think the biggest icing on the cake is, remember, everything is figure outable. You're dealing with people. Emotion has a huge, heavy hand in a lot of decisions that both buyers and sellers make. And guess what? Even agents get overwhelmed at whatever it is, rather than really focus on what is the problem and how can we get to a solution. So rather than like let it throw everything off the rails, remember that everything's figure outable.
It doesn't have to.
And it really doesn't. Yeah. And if you get to that point where it's like the end of the line, then, you realize that you're not giving up, but realize like, hey, this just was not supposed to happen. Ooh, what is it?
The video submissions for this time is going to be, tell us about your inspections. The worst ones? The worst ones. Like, what have you guys come across in inspections where it's like, whoa.
Please be a dead body. No, that's
like
horrible.
just randomly a dead body. Like there's been a dead mouse body in a couple of inspections.
I am nervous about what we're going to see. I think that I've seen it all. However, I know that.
Do you know in Florida we do not have to disclose if there has been a dead body? It seems weird. But when I was in New Orleans, actually, it was a long time ago. I went with my roommates from college, and one of the selling points on the listing sign, their writer said haunted.
So that
was a selling point for them. Meanwhile, I'm like, hard pass for me.
I'd be talking to the neighbors. Hey, what happened at this?
I I want to know all the salacious details for sure. So I think this week, what's our to-go box, virtual to-go box item? Maybe a lead magnet, Jenny? What do you think?
Yeah, we have a couple of lead nights that we could choose from.
So like, maybe I would say a property condition lead magnet is something that's really good as for buyers. And maybe also we'll throw in one for sellers too.
Yeah,
Getting
yeah,
your property
right?
ready to
Yeah.
list, but also as a buyer, things to look for during your home inspection.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think that's a really good one. And again, everything that we give out for you guys is free because we
on
just
the
want to
link.
help you guys sell more real estate and again, have way more fun doing it. One of I think the last bite that I'd like to talk about, if you don't mind, is, I do see agents struggle sometimes when the hits keep coming in the inspection and it's like, oh, it also needs a septic. Oh, it also needs a drain field. Oh, it also needs new AC, another AC. All 3 AC units are like, and you start to sort of hyperventilate, maybe internally at least. Sometimes externally, obviously, we get that call a lot too. I implore you to really dig deep into your power as a human and as a real estate superhero, because this is your opportunity to really show them and what I call sing for your supper. Like you can actually show them that they really did luck out by landing you, and you utilize all these hits that keep on coming. Don't let them knock you down. Let that be the fuel for your fire to keep fighting on their behalf, because guess what? Even if you can't save that deal based on the condition of the house, remember the house is underwritten too. The house has to also be approved, not just the buyer if they're financing. So remember that. But also utilize that time to really, call in the troops, get your 3 quotes for every single thing that is an issue, rely on the co-agent to also work together, and don't just give up. Don't just lay down and take it, like stand up and fight, because what you're going to do is you're going to build loyalty and a lifetime of a client for life. I mean, I'm telling you, from 21 years of experience, there's nothing better than having that client that you sold a house to 21 years ago still use you, because they know, like, when the going gets tough, you've got their back for sure, right?
Yeah. And on the flip side, when the seller's getting the list with this long laundry list of things, like, understand that it's been their home. Like, this is where they've lived.
Yeah, and it's
right?
emotional for them. Because remember, real estate, it is crazy.
And you don't have to be.